So today we're going to talk about what's covered inside of the Advanced Web App Pen Testing course. And so I get this question a lot. We get to hear a lot of people asking, well, there's the regular pen testing course, there's the advanced one. What's in the advanced one? What am I going to get out of it? And I think the Advanced Web App Pen Testing course is fairly unique in many ways, right? It is an interesting, it's almost like we talk about this internally. It's more like a web app exploitation course, right? Where we just go in and we really do build a lot of exploits around web applications, because that is the workflow of many of the web app pen testers. So let's get started. Why are we even here today? And I want to start with a story. So Adrien is one of the co-authors of this course, and this is Adrien here. He's Canadian, which we won't hold that against him. And he's a co-author and a course lead for 642. He's not here. He's not on here that I'm aware of. Just go with this story, okay? Anyway, Adrien is also a karate instructor. There's something else about him. You could probably, or a karate student, not instructor, and he could probably chop off my head, but we won't go there, okay? He had a statement as we were talking. He said, we want to build, and we want students to actually come to one of the most advanced web application penetration testing courses in the world. And we have this almost this position at SANS to say, we can actually build something that's really, really cutting edge, really stellar, and can really advance the industry forward. And there's a lot of students that come to our class and they may have different mindsets, right? So they could either be pen testers on the network side, they could be starting off on web app pen testing, they could come from the network world, they can come from the systems administration world, they can come from even the development world a lot of times, and they want to build their skill set in this way. So he says we got to make sure that we're always hitting that bar, that we are creating the most advanced content that we can for students, right? And some students, they come to our class and they actually go out and not just do pen testing, but they start looking at bug bounties and going to all the bug bounty programs, because a lot of them are based on the web, and they start to build their skill set that way, with us giving them that starting point, which is great. And then there's me. This is a picture of me at Black Hat. So this is a recent picture, or actually at DEF CON. So recent picture. And I'm not Canadian at all, so, and I can't really karate chop Adrien's head off, and I'm like, oh yeah, you want to create the most advanced, class in the world? And I said, well, wait a minute, I think we actually kind of been doing that in a way, right? And so we want to talk about what's in the course today, what's being covered, why we think it's pretty advanced course, and we are always updating this course. We're always coming up with new bizarre ways of looking at web apps and making them cry. And it's so much fun to do that, right? So much of our world today is front-ended by the World Wide Web, that it ends up being the kind of the gateway to everything, which to me is great. It's a beautiful thing. That's who I am. This is a follow-up to the 542 course. So we think we have the coolest coin to give away if you win the CTF. Every course instructor will tell you that they have the coolest coin to give away. But for our class, we think it's the best coin to give away. It's a samurai kind of dragon, with the hat and everything. Just for folks that actually wants to do the CTF and can win it. It's a lot of fun. We do focus mostly on exploitation, which is even much more fun. All right, so what's in the course? So this is geared towards intermediate and advanced web pen testers, right? That was the idea. Does that mean that if I am a kind of been through the web app course, what do I need to know? How scared am I? So I'm going to be here to kind of explain and show you an example of what you're doing in this class to kind of alleviate fears of what could be going on. And we do get that from time to time where people are a little bit gun shy to figure out what's in the class and how they can expand their knowledge. So I want to make sure that we level set with everybody and that they walk away, seeing a bit of a demo and seeing a bit of what we do, how we do what we do in the class, and how you can kind of join in. And not just that, for those that are going to be watching the webcast, right? In this demo, there's an undisclosed Easter egg, right? So in the class, a lot of us have written these little Easter eggs that are not documented, not disclosed. They're made for us to actually give something additional to the students, right? If you're uber wizard and you've got time after, or you stay after class and you want to bang your head on a problem, we give you like Easter eggs, but you got to find them and you got to figure out how to solve them. So I'm going to give you one. Never done that before, but I want to just give you one to show you that there are additional things in the class that you know, taken from one lesson into another and kind of combines them, which is a lot of fun. Okay, so with that said, in other words, you need to have some comfort here to be in this course, right? The comfort level that you need to have is you need to be able to not be afraid of looking at a little bit of code, right? Are we telling people to develop code? Oh, absolutely not, right? Well, I would never wish that on anybody. Anybody that's ever worked with developers realize that they're a strange breed, and sometimes you may have to be completely drunk to develop code, because it is one of these mind-blowing, mind-boggling things that you almost got to get out of your head. But you got to be comfortable with at least looking at the code, right? And mostly you're going to be looking at things like JavaScript and the like. And of all the things you can look at in the world, I have to apologize in advance because JavaScript is a nightmare of stuff, but that's what we deal with. And that's the truth, right? The truth is you're out there, you're dealing with this stuff. Okay, so here's the course layout. On the first day, what we do typically is we talk about advanced attacks. So what's included in these advanced attacks? Well, included in these advanced attacks are things like local file inclusions and remote file inclusions, and things like stream wrappers in specific development languages. We talk about those. You'll see some stream wrappers today. We talk about SQL injection, some advanced things that people don't talk about in SQL Map, right? Some NoSQL stuff, right? So some of those databases. We talk about chaining two exploits together. It's very heavy lab focus right from day one. The first minute that you get into this class, you're doing labs, right? And you're doing labs, you know, from jump. I think sometimes there's 7, 8 labs in a day, things like that. Very lab heavy, very lab focused. Then we talk to a day known as our web frameworks day, right? Where we get into things like Django and MVC and .NET and Java and struts. We talk about deserialization attacks, right? This is something that is pretty interesting to see in the wild. It's really, really interesting to see how deserialization has kind of eaten up a major portions of web app pen testing. And then we talk about other things like type inference issues, right? Where disparate types, and we'll do an example of this today, different types, and depending on the language, could lead to exploitation. And then we'll have a section on practical CMS exploitation, right? Where you jump into something like a WordPress site, which is maybe a weak username and password, and how do I get shell on something like this, right? How do I go from WordPress username password leak or some kind of weak username password into a web shell, right? And that's kind of an interesting attack vector, right? Because a lot of times there are companies out there, major companies out there, that their front end is a CMS. And if it has an exposed administrative console, an attacker could use that to actually get into a system. And we kind of show you how that workflow would work. Now, in the middle of our week, we go into this really great section that's known as, we call it web cryptography, right? And to a lot of people, a lot of students, crypto tends to be this unspoken of dark art, right? And what we talk about in the web cryptography section isn't so much the cryptographic breaking of an algorithm, right? Not too many people that are walking the planet understand that. However, what we talk about is, how do I take something that we know as web crypto and how do we abuse it in such a way that we can pull out keys, disclose what the cryptography was hiding, bypass CAPTCHAs, do padding oracles, right? We talk about issues with cipher blockchaining and electronic cookbook mode without integrity checking, and all the different permutation of things that we've seen out there in the wild that aren't about algorithm cracking, but more about abusing the implementations in which these algorithms were put in, right? That tends to be a very fun day, a very thought-provoking day, a day where a lot of students go in and go, oh, wow, I saw crypto. I didn't know what this was. It looked like a blob of code. And now that you're showing me how to abuse it, this is practical kind of exploitation that I can take home with me. Day 4, we talk about what was legacyly known as alternative web interfaces. I think we see these a lot more and more, right? Things that are not driven on the web browser technology themselves, right? So rich media applications like Silverlight Flash, we still see those. Web services like XML and XML entities and WebSockets, right? HTTP2 and some other things that are out there, SOAP and REST. So we actually start to attack other types of web interfaces. These are things that you might even see on an iPhone, on an Android, right? On a car running an Android of all things, right? So now you've got a moving vehicle running, Android that's got all these bugs in it, right? So all these kind of ways that the web is presenting itself, a full day on that. We end the week with bypassing WAFs. So this is kind of something that you're going to go up against. A lot of companies, a lot of systems out there have web application firewalls. A lot of individuals, or many individuals, will tell you, well, these web application firewalls are designed to prevent or block attacks, which is true, right? They are designed to block attacks. However, a lot of the way that we explain to students, the way that we instruct our students is to approach these systems as just another barrier, right? So they're starting to filter out or blacklist certain things. Can you work your way around the blacklist and get your exploit to fire? This is a common problem that web app pen testers will come up against. And so WAF bypass, fingerprinting WAFs, things like mod security, those are realities that we have to contend with, okay? And the industry is evolving beyond this, right? To where we talk about, we don't demonstrate it yet, but something that is emerging in our space is talking about the existence of technologies that start to mark the behavior of the users in the applications and start to score them to the point where when a user starts doing things that are evil, eventually the system will kick you out. The idea is not to allow attackers to sit there forever trying to break through your application, right? This is something that we're starting to see. So how do we handle that as pen testers? And that's somewhat of an evolving topic in our class. Finally, in day 6, we talk about our CTF. Our CTFs are always like many of the SANS core CTF. It is our capstone. It is our everything brought together, full exercise CTF. This combines all the previous days into a single lab. You have to work in teams, so that's a lot of fun. We actually kind of coach our students to start building their teammates up front, right? That way you've got a full week of getting your teams together. It's kind of fun. There is no teams of one. Hopefully nobody in class is having invisible people around. Could always happen. Winners do earn the coveted SEC642 samurai coins. Those are very coveted, very rare coins. Kind of almost like the 760 coins, super rare. So not too many of those walking around the planet, and those are always fun to see kind of out there. Jason, I think that, are you still there, Jason? You were quiet this whole time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, oh, look at that. I wasn't sure. Does that, I think that covers the majority of our class, 6-day class. So I do have some other material, but I don't know if there's any questions in the audience before I get into some kind of demo fun stuff or.
I got a quick question for you. Is the WAF and filter bypass covered in 542?
No, WAF and filter bypasses are not mentioned, are not covered in 542.
That's the only question I got so far.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. All right. So I want to give, so Jason, we were talking about this. What's covered in 642, et cetera. I wanted to give the audience here, with enough time, right? And I think we have enough time, a taste of what some of the material in the class. I thought that would be fair, right? Because I think a lot of people have an apprehension towards some of these advanced classes, and it's, in my opinion, it's always great to demystify these. But I mean, we could end it right here. We could kind of do something, we can just go into a demo. I mean, what do you think?
Well, the SANS promises that what we teach here, people can use tomorrow. So if you're going to cover something that people can use and things like that, that's fantastic.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll do something. I think I'll do something. Let's see. So, first of all, just to be able to put everybody's mind at ease about how much code they need to read to do the class, it's just this. And hopefully everybody can understand this. And if you can, then we can proceed with a demo, right? Because, I mean, this is pretty clear. I think it says something like IT, but I'm not sure. I'm just kidding. This actually is a screenshot. I was looking at it for this course. This is a screenshot of the world's ugliest code. And according to Quora, this is the ugliest code ever designed. And I look at this and I cringe trying to understand this. So you don't have to read this. No human in the world should have to read this. Let's talk about type inference, right? I'm going to make this kind of fun for everybody. And I'll show everybody a demo of this. You don't have to read that kind of monstrosity code. So we talk about PHP somewhat in class. I mean, we don't just focus on PHP, but if you look at the internet in general, even though PHP as a language is declining in interest, about 35 to 40% of the web today is still PHP. So the propensity for some of our students to look and run and feel and play with PHP sites will be rather high. The top three biggest, by the way, based on what we're looking at, and this is going to make a lot of people that might hear the audio cast kind of sad, but the top three biggest languages on the web today, other than JavaScript, which we know is used everywhere, is Java, PHP, and .NET. Okay. And that's kind of a big thing, because even though it looks like old stodgy languages, you just get to see a lot of this code out there that's still being written. The thing that's interesting with PHP is the language itself has got some issues, right? We're just going to say issues because, as everybody, if you've been following this, PHP 7, they go through this and they try to solve some of these issues, but the issues are not always solvable in PHP. So here's a classic example. This is a part of the class we call type juggling. It's actually a type inference issue. And so basically what's happening here is the way that PHP works is it tries to infer by default, it tries to infer what kind of a variable you're passing, right? So in my example here, just to make it kind of simple, if I have a variable called foo, and I make foo, in quotes as a 0, it will type infer that. In other words, it'll basically say this is a type of a string, right? It says that even though it's a number 0, it's basically a string. If I declare foo to be 5, and then I say, hey, you know what? Foo is not just 5. Foo is 5 and the string value of 10 little piggies, right? What PHP does in this example is it takes that other portion that is in quotes and it says the first thing I'm going to do when I try to figure out what 10 little piggies is I'm going to infer that it's an integer first. I'm going to convert it to an integer. And if I can add 5 and 10, then I'm going to assume that the developer made this an integer, right? It's an inference, right? And so the first thing that PHP does is it takes a 10 and it lops off the little piggies and it says, oh, it's 15, right? And so now foo is actually not 5 and a string, it's actually 15, right? And this is not by itself on the surface an issue. This is just a feature of the language that they convert integers or strings to integers and the like. Okay, now, and by the way, this kind of explains it, right? So when you take the class, we talk about a lot of things. It kind of explains what's going on. And, you could read the source code of PHP to understand a little bit more what's happening here. But the idea is that it infers things, right? And if you're ever coded in another language like C or C++ back in college, you would or sometimes in JavaScript, you would declare what these things were up front, right? This is a string, this is an integer, etc. PHP, Python, many languages are not like this, right? No big deal. So now let's talk about how does PHP deal with comparing things, right? Because if you've got inference issues, right, and you do this, how does PHP, know when something should be equal to something? In most languages, when you want to make sure that something is equal to something, you will see something that says double equals, right? And unfortunately, in PHP, double equals is actually not what you think. The first thing that double equals does is it does type inference, just like we saw before, okay? PHP calls this identical, but not equal, right? Or sorry, equal, but not identical. Sorry, I had that backwards. Triple equals, which is the strangest thing in the world. No other programming language that I've seen actually does this. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some arcane programming language does this. But in PHP, triple equals means literally identical. So how do I do, like, what does this mean, right? So one's called the loose checking and one's called strict checking. And so if you have the string value of 0 and an integer of 0, they can double equal and work. But if you have the string value of 0 and a triple equals of 0, strings are not integers, and so they'll never convert, and so they'll never be equal. Okay, but what you could see where a developer who's coding for a while can make these large, gigantic leaps and issues because, well, when you're doing something sensitive, you should be using a triple equals because you want to make sure that something is identical and not a double equal. It's a dumb thing that can happen, but let's just go with the fact that this could happen. So when you're reviewing code for any reason, and you see things like this in sensitive areas, well, this is what you should pay attention to. Maybe there is a problem here. Okay, no big deal, right? Now, let me give you where this really gets odd, right? So if you've got something that compares, let's say you have a 0, and by the way, I took this example straight from a vulnerability in a web forum called the Simple Machines Forum, okay? So if you've ever seen PHPBB and vBulletin, Simple Machines Forum was a popular kind of bulletin board forum engine. And there was a bug back in 2012, right? So, I mean, recent-ish, right? Where if you got a hash and the hash started with a 0, right? So in my example, you say I have $B, 0E, something, right? A couple of ways that you can look at this, right? One is that it's 0E as part of an MD5 hash. Another way you can look at it is that it's 0 exponents, right? Which would be a weird kind of thing. The way that PHP would look at this is if you did a comparison between A and B and it was using the two equals, so in other words, it's not a strict comparison, it would take the 0, E, lob off everything after the E, and it would compare the 0, right? And if the 0 compared to 0, well, then it would be identical. What the attackers figured out is that if you kept asking for a password reset and you got a hash that started with a 0 and a letter, and you asked for the administrator's password or the forum, user 0 password to be reset, that you could pass him a hash and the user, and it would check as identical, and you would actually know you would actually be asked to set the administrator's password of the forum, and you'd be able to take over the forum. Pretty evil, and it was all because of this type conversion error. And I was like, well, that's a pretty realistic, practical example of where this kind of stuff can go wild, just wrong, right? Because 0 gets evaluated in unusual ways. Other things that can happen is PHP can do this weird thing where if it does a type comparison or a type juggling against disparate types, and we're going to show this in a second, but the idea here is that disparate types, PHP treats errors or basically nulls in the programming languages as zeros as well, right? So you can do all these oddities, especially with these of 0, right? Because 1 is true and 0 is false, and You have all these weird things. But one of the things that PHP does as a word is it compares nulls and zeros as identical. And so with this strict type inference, it actually will convert the null to an integer, and it'll actually be a true integer. It's kind of interesting to see how PHP evaluates zeros and nulls. We're going to abuse this one thing here to actually get into a system. One of the things that PHP does that's really unusual is once you start looking at these strict comparisons, if it starts to evaluate a comparison and you can cause an error condition, the error condition can return a null value. And for those that have never taken this computer science class, I mean, if you've ever been exposed to this, just for the first time, we'll talk about it. Nulls and zeros, or null is an everything object, right? It's a catch-all, right? So a null is a string, a null is an integer, a null is it's an everything. It's everything and nothing. It's basically a catch-all object in many languages. And so you can go in here and kind of evaluate zeros and nulls and see how this works. So here's a live fire example, and I'll do this in a lab for you in a minute. Here's a live fire example of what that would look like. So first of all, in your command prompt, you can actually type PHP -a and dump yourself into a shell, right? So this is a PHP interpretive shell. The PHP interpretive shell is all sorts of, it's kind of like just live PHP. So you can say, hey, I want to declare A to 1 and B to 2 and C to the string value of 1. And then you can use a special function in PHP called bar dump, which basically will dump out what the variables are set to based on what you evaluate. So if you evaluate A to B, it says, well, 1 and 2 are not equal, so that's false. If you evaluate A to C, which is basically string and an integer, that's true. And if you try to strictly evaluate A to C, it's false, right? So that's an actual interactive example of comparisons. But what happens if you try to evaluate a string and say an array? Okay, so a string is something like a word, an array is a couple of different things, right? So it could be like 1, 2, 3. That's an array of 3 things. Or it could be the string value of 1, the string value of 2, the string value of 3. Well, that's an array of 3, strings. Well, if you try to figure out what these two things evaluate to and compare them, PHP, or most programming languages, they'll tell you is, well, these are 2 disparate types. And so strings and arrays can never be equal ever, ever, ever. And you can't even evaluate them, so they should error. However, in PHP, they don't just error. They cause a null condition. And because of what I showed you before, nulls end up as zeros, okay? And using type inference, you could do some odd things. For example, if you're looking for a 0 as your return value, and you cause the engine an error, believe it or not, PHP will error, return a null, and then evaluate that and keep running. So if the null was supposed to compare with a 0, it'll actually pass the check. It's a bizarre corner case or a bizarre edge case, but it's an edge case that attackers have been kind of abusing for many, many years. So I'll show you what that looks like and how that works, but it's really kind of interesting. So let me show you what I got, and I'll do an Easter egg as well. So I'm going to switch over. By the way, Jason, any questions so far? I don't want to switch over to chat yet.
Not at this time. Keep going.
Awesome. All right, great. So let's do this. Let's go in here. Boom, boom. All right. I've got my easy bake oven, by the way. So if anybody's wondering why all my systems are live fire and ready to go, it's kind of, in an informal way, the easy bake oven. It's also my, hey, if I forgot something or if I fingered something, I can very, very seamlessly go in and kind of show you from history. All right, so let me open up a new window. Give me a second while my machine kind of wakes itself up. I'm going to open up a new window here, and what I'm going to do is there is a web application that we have built for class that I have coined Type Juggler, but it's really about disparate types and abusing them, okay? And there's 2 parts to this, right? So in class, oops, I don't think it matters if it's caps lock or not, but in class, we basically have you pull down the source code of Type Juggler from from a backup file, right? That's one way of getting at the source code, okay? And I'm not going to walk you through the whole ins and outs of the lab that way because you'll get to see that in class and kind of review the source code. What I did want to show you is how do you defeat something like Type Juggler. So first is, you've got this really weird thing where it says, hey, your username, and it looks like it's hard set, right? Your username is this, it's basically an IP address, and your password is blank. And the idea here is I can do a generation of a password, and there's all sorts of ways that you could break this, right? Because we're doing all sorts of comparisons. So I've had students attack this application all sorts of fun ways. But the straightforward way is, let's just go ahead and generate a new password. This is going to take me to a screen that's got a 60-second password. You see it says here it's good for the next 7 seconds. So let me just go ahead and refresh it, get a new password. Okay, great. I'm going to grab this password. Hopefully I can. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to try to log in. And I think at this point it's going to say, well, you're close, but no, you're not. You don't win. I mean, and you could try to sit here and break the application all sorts of ways, but so far this is all you got. Now there's this Win PHP file that obviously contains some kind of logic that will allow you to get to this flag, but you don't have access to the code because when you try to pull the PHP file through the Apache engine, it's going to basically process it as a PHP file, and it won't allow you to read the source code, right? So what's the Easter egg here, right? So what is the fun part here, right? We've given people several ways to read the source code, and that's where the fun part is. And so one of the ways that we've given people is we actually have you go into Type Juggler, and we have you go in here into the docs and say, hey, we got documentation. Not many people wander in here unless they are kind of curious. And this is where the Easter egg lies, right? By the way, if you could always go in here and see a picture of a cat. Cat picture is always fun. Notice though that right here, it says index.php page equals cat. One of the things that you could infer from this is that this cat page is probably some file on the disk like cat.php, right? Wouldn't it be cool if you could do something like this, where you do like / win and get the win.php to come back, right? Actually, let me lower. It's not lowercase, huh? Win. I don't know why it's not letting me do the lowercase part. Oh. Let's see what happened here. That's strange. 1 second. Let's try to bring that back up. Type. Come on. Wakey. There we go. And I'm not sure. Give me 1 second, folks. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on with my caps lock. Hopefully my caps lock is now still depressed. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. So caps lock's working out. Yay. All right. So let me go in and now I'm going to go into the docs. We're going to go into this cat one. Hopefully when we go to the cat one, we'll see the cat picture. You'll see that I'm going to try to pull forward win.php, and you're not going to be able to see that file. Why? Because when PHP is going to pull over win.php, it's going to process the file, and you're not going to have access to view the actual raw source code. All you're going to be able to view is, well, whatever win.php is going to allow you to do. Now, I'm not adding the .php. I'm going to assume that .php is being stripped off, right? And you'll see it doesn't error, but it doesn't come back with what I want, right? So how do we get what we want to appear? And so here is the trick, right? And so what we can do, and this is why it was the Easy Bake Oven, we can pass into it something called a PHP stream filter. Now, I don't know why in the world they decided to build this into the language the way they did. We can make all sorts of assumptions and the like, but honestly, we shouldn't read too much into it, because whenever you get into the deep, dark depths of PHP, you start to question your own life and your own existence. So don't even go there. They have this concept of a stream filter. And what you can do with a stream filter is that you can have PHP read in on runtime whatever it wants and render it or encode it as base 64. As this needs to be something that was built into the language feature for some reason and couldn't be put into straight code. So what we can do is we can abuse this. Okay, and we talk about this in another section of class, where we basically are abusing stream filters. Okay, and this makes up my Easter egg. Okay, so I'm going to put in here a stream filter. Let's see, we're going to put it in here. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to read the win.php file off of the disk. As it's reading it off of the disk, it's going to put it in as PHP because it's going to, as base 64. Because it's going to be rendered as base 64, when it shows up on this page, it will not be rendered as source code, and we will be able to pull out the source code from the system. It's a fun little Easter egg. All right. And there it is. So this is our base 64 encoded string. Let's just decode it with burp and see if this is actually source code. So let's go to decoder. Let's delete this, whatever this was. Control A. Control V. Okay. Aha. And if you see the bottom here, looks like PHP. Okay. If you start reading this PHP, it says, hey, you have to look for a user and a password field. And the password is going to be basically a function called makeKey, which we have as another option. It's basically somewhere else, another set of code, and user. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see a string comparison. And down here, you can see that we're comparing the password and what we are putting in the password. And we're comparing it to 0, okay? Now, for those of you that have already started thinking about this, you realize that us comparing it to something that is 0 should be the leading indicator, loose comparison, right? Should be the leading indicator here that if we could cause a type confusion bug, or basically a bug in which you have some kind of a strange error condition, we're going to be able to abuse this in such a way that an attacker can cause a null, compare the null to a 0, and then gain access. There is one other thing in the code, and probably should talk about it now, and that is we made it so that if you were localhost, okay, that you would have to basically be 127.0.0.1 for the first check, and then for the secondary check, we're going to use an array, okay? And you got to read into the code some more to see. Sorry about that. Let me try to fix this here. I don't think it's copying correctly. Here we go. Actually, I don't know. It didn't seem to copy the whole string. That's kind of odd. Should copy the whole thing. Let me, for those that have ever done this in burp, you've seen some weird wackiness before. And if you want to look at it the right way, you probably should have done it. I probably should have done it this way and just gone to the bottom and pulled out the response string in here and then done it this way. All right, this is probably the safer way in burp to do it. For those that have never done it before, you just kind of highlight this and then send this to the decoder. Don't know why it was acting so funky like that, but whatever. And then we want to decode this as base 64. Okay, so we do that. And here's what I'm talking about. Your user has to be 127.0.0.1, and your string comparison has to go through, right? And you can see one if and then another if. All right, so let's give that a whirl, right? Let's actually show you what that would look like in practice. How do I exploit this condition, right? So the first thing we do is we go back to the login page and we try to rerun that transaction where we have a password. Now I'm just going to put any password I want, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't matter at this point, because what we're going to do is we're going to intercept it. And when we go ahead and push this forward, we're going to change a few things. So let's go ahead and come over here, hit login. Once we do that, it's going to pause it. Let's go over here. So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this 127.0.0.1, right? Okay. Now, what we're going to do here is, if we leave it like this, nothing's going to happen. We got to make it an array. So how do you build an array in PHP? Well, you have to build an array in PHP, by the way, by using angle brackets, something like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Well, how do I make an array compared to a number in PHP? So the trick is you have to do this. This will tell pass that it's going to compare a number to the array, and it's an empty array, by the way. It doesn't have to have anything in it. So an empty array compared to a string or compared to an integer, that's not going to work. But when you forward it, right, what happens is PHP errors completely, and it passes the check and it lets you win, right? And so here's the flag. Notice that there was an error at the top, right? You're close because the password didn't match, but it kept processing the transaction and passed the check. So as long as you pass the check, doesn't matter what happened before, you already passed the check. And here's your flag for winning your contest, right? And so if you ever want to go look in the back end and see the error conditions in PHP, you can go ahead and do that. We show you how to do that in class. But that's pretty much what we're doing. We're breaking and bending these applications to our will and doing some advanced things when all you see sometimes is simple things like a username and password. There's all sorts of other tricks and tips and things that we talk about in class, but this is a great example of abuse of a language. All right, so that's our demo for today, Jason. Do we have any questions?
I have a few questions while people are asking their questions. So if you have questions, please ask at this point.
Yeah.
So is this course available on demand?
This course is available on VLive. I have to check if we put it back on demand. So if you give if you pass a note to myself or to Jason, we will get back to you with that answer.
Yeah. So to answer that question too, it is available on demand. And,
oh, look at that! It is. Oh, great! I didn't know.
Yeah. And is there anything that people should really have under their belt? You know, some kind of coding or anything like? Do you recommend any prerequisites for someone to take?
Oh, yeah, this is dicey, right? I would say if what I just went through seems to jive at some level, it doesn't have to be like you understood the entire concept, but if what we just went through at a very, very microscopic level was not scary and seemed to jive, you'll do fine in class.
And then lastly, unless anyone else has any additional questions, what are some things people can do once they've taken the class to maintain these skills if they're not able to use them at work?
Well, what I recommend is you constantly spam Jason Blanchard, and he will respond with nasty letters. No, I get this question all the time. One of the things that I think is great about our industry is it's constantly evolving. So if you aren't able to take advantage of this at work professionally, I think a great resource that doesn't get talked about a lot, other than dojos and stuff, is basically going into and getting yourself involved with a lot of these bug bounty programs, right? So if you look at all the bug bounty companies that are out there, and there's several of them, you can join these they're not competitions, but you can join these bounty programs that give you a legitimate way of using your skill set. It's not costing you any money out of pocket, right? And if you are actually able to find and report bugs that are accepted by the vendor, you actually will get a cash incentive out of it, right? Now, will it be the most financially rewarding thing? I mean, I think, you'd have to ask the bug bounty people who makes money off these bounties or whatever. But from just an education and keeping your skills sharp standpoint, I think it's a great and legitimate way to actually use that skill set, so long as your company allows you to do freelance work. I mean, every company has different contractual obligations, but that's a great way of doing it. Other things include things like, being able to pull down these hacking web applications that are out there, like Damn Vulnerable Web App, WebGoat, Mozilla Day. Those are great. And finally, as another option, if you go to a website like this, and these are kind of becoming popular, so let me bring one up. If you go to something like ctftime.org, this is a website that actually tells you about all of the Capture the Flag competitions that are out there. There's one starting every day, if not every half day at this point. There's professional teams around the world. Every one of these CTFs that I've seen has some kind of a web application component. So even if you don't go through the entire CTF, you're more than welcome to go through the web app components and play that way. So there's all sorts of ways to keep your skills sharp. It's really more, it's kind of like what I tell my daughter when she was learning music, right? You just need to practice music, right? And do it for 20 minutes a day, right? Do it for some amount of time at first. And then once you've got that practice under your belt, when you want to get better at something like what I talked about, some kind of a type inference thing or whatever, you're going to have to do focus practice. So you're going to have to take and ingest something that you really want to focus on. Like, I really suck at cross-site scripting. And then that's what you're going to practice for 20 minutes, right? That focused practice to get you better at this one thing will over time make you better. It's the way it works.
I have a question from Travis. Does this course dive into identity much? I think it's...
Ooh, that is a great question.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a great question. We are adding identity pieces into it. If you follow Adrien's Twitter or you follow the GPwn list, Robin Wood just disclosed another tool, and Robin's great. He goes by the handle of DigiNinja. I think many people have probably run his tools. We've got a couple of his web apps in here. For example, a WebSockets one. He wrote one for Adrien called Vuln LDAP. And the idea was we wanted to show how you could take an application that was vulnerable that had LDAP as an authentication backend. So that's being written into the course now. And we are talking about other areas such as OAuth, like writing an OAuth module, because that seems to be another big and heavy one, and maybe even a password cracking one. It's not as super into authentication in general as it should be, but we are constantly adding to the course. And so don't be surprised if in a few months we've added an LDAP, PHP, LDAP vulnerability thing in there, just so you could play around with that.
Travis said thanks, and I think that is all the questions that we have for today. So Moses, I'm going to turn over to you for any final words, and then back to Carol to end it for today.
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, I'd like to thank SANS for giving me the time to talk about the course. This course is great. I hope everybody that got to hear it or is hearing it or that will hear it later gets something out of it, right? Whether it was you like the funny demo or you want to know more about the course. We do get a lot of questions. We get a bevy of questions that come from the community for, how does the class flow and other SANS related questions. We do monitor social media and Facebook, etc. You can always reach out to either myself. I put one of the main authors on here, Justin. You're the SANS staff. You could post on the mailing list. You could shout me out on Twitter. Twitter handles out there, or Pentest out there, by all means. And if there's any other questions, I'll be around. And I'd like to thank Jason for hosting me.
Thanks, Moses.
All right, and Moses, I'm only seeing a part of that slide right now. It looks like it's
oh
zoomed
no,
in a little bit.
Is it obscured by this here? Maybe
I see most of it, but not quite all. But you know what? The slide deck's available for download, so they can find it there for sure. But thank you so much, Moses, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.